Well, I'm going to have to do one little short unprofessor video on the Wet'suwet'en crisis. And it is a crisis. I watched a couple of videos. I've got to shave, so I have my shirt off. So we're just going to stay like this. I'm the unprofessor Mike Club in Skookum 1. I'm a Canadian, and a British Columbian. I'm very upset about what has happened with the use of paramilitary and military force on lands that have no treaty. So I just watched the rally in Regina where the native woman came up, and it's, on one of these channels where they present mostly the redneck side. The redneck side, we want jobs, we have a right to jobs, she has no respect for us, she has no respect, and they says, that she needs more education. Oh boys, hey, look at you oil monkeys, you stupid idiots. Okay, I'll not call you stupid. You're just uneducated. You do not understand that there are no treaties west of the Rockies. Nobody has a right to be selling anything. Trees, minerals, oil permits, anything like that. British Columbia is a fiction. Anyway, so this guy was going on and on, but look at the face of this. This is the face of pipeline opposition. So he points this big crowd of redneck dudes who make a lot of money, and one guy's bitching because my buddy hasn't had work in the last only 7 days work in the last 30 days. Yeah, well, ask the natives what poverty is like when your land is taken from you after you've been raped and put in residential schools, or after you've been put in residential schools. Ask them what that's like. Oh, I'm just so angry about what the rednecks in this country, I call it the redneck belt, everywhere that's outside the cities. It really is. Canada, the redneck belt is worse than white supremacist US because they think they're good people. They think that they're in the right because they need their job and they want their industry and they don't care about the lack of any treaty. So here's our dear darling Prime Minister in Regina. I thought it was in Kamloops where he is today. Well, I hope he gets a roasting in Kamloops because there's a town hall in Kamloops today. So this was in Regina. And this woman stood up. Again, a woman stood up. A woman stood up. And our dear feminist prime minister patronized her. She was shy. He let her speak and kind of get his usual people. He let her speak. And then she even condemned him that she didn't even stick around to want to hear what he said because she said that everything he said that day, everybody was making pointed questions and all he did was talk in circles. That's all he's there for, is to talk in circles. That's all our prime minister does. He's paid to talk in circles by the people who got him into power. And I won't go on about who they are. I've already said, we already know who he's working for now. We can see that. Okay, so this is a military state Canada right now. I've had suspicions about my live YouTube broadcast getting intercepted and things being clipped, Okay, I get it, I get it, okay? And yeah, I'm just a crazy man on the internet, sure. But you'd be crazy too if you lived in this country and you were told that all these people were sane. So look, folks, this is the deal. Right, the Prime Minister says, he starts talking on and on and on about how, well, the treaties were engaged in respect and we intend to honor them, but he's avoiding the point about the Wet'suwet'en that there is no treaty. The treaty that he's observing by using armed force against the people of British Columbia, who happen to be the sovereign Wet'suwet'en people who do not consider themselves Canadian. They do not consider them as part of Canada, and that's why they don't vote. So we have 5-6% of British Columbia who don't vote. And of Canada who don't vote. And why don't they vote? Because of what the Crown either has done to them in the areas that are treated, or in the areas where there are no treaties, which is like British Columbia, west of the Rockies. And exactly the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Confederacy, who are the famous Delgamuukw case. Now, people in the rest of Canada and the rest of the world don't know what the Delgamuukw case was. Delgamuukw is spelled with 2 W's and a KW. And it's a hereditary chieftain of the Gitxsan, who are the people around the junction, the Skeena around the junction of the Bulkley, and the Wet'suwet'en, 5 Wet'suwet'en chiefs are part of an ancient confederacy with them that is much older than Canada itself. It's like the Iroquois Confederacy, who were signatories to the Congress of Vienna as allies against Napoleon, and they were recognized as an independent state until the Durham Report wiped them off the map. And they disappeared from the map. And the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en only appeared on the map when the Delgamuukw case came up. And it's like, it's a pretty big area. It's not quite the size of Nova Scotia, but it's getting up there. That's a big area. Prince Edward Island, maybe the size of it. And, the majority of the people there, you take out the social workers and you take out the government bureaucrats and the government highway workers and, the colonial resource workers, you take them out. And who's the majority? Yeah, the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan. Also the Tsimshian in their area, the Haida in theirs. Down the coast, definitely Heiltsuk and definitely Nuhulk, which is Bellacoola. And the Kwakwakkwak, who are people think of them as a Kwakweel, but that's just one tribe of them. They're like northern Vancouver Island down to Campbell River, and then the west coast, all the Charlotte. None of those people have treaties except for a very few of them down near Victoria, and a couple of two on the island up north. We live in a country that has that Chief Dan George stood up at Empire Stadium in 1967. He'd been invited to speak to praise Confederation about what a great thing it was. What did Dan George do? And as the sun set or whatever, there was an article on this by Trevor Lawton or somebody. I'm drinking some water here. Dan George railed against Canada. And his glowing, everybody knows Dan George's voice, and it was gripping, and the whole stadium was gripped for as long as he spoke, and it's a famous speech, look it up. And I think probably there's film of it somewhere, and I hope it surfaces. And that touched off the native awareness movement, and it touched off, the rejection of the Chrétien white paper, where they just wanted to assimilate everybody, do away with the Indian Act without redressing anything. They've taken all the gold, they've taken all the trees, they've taken all the coal. They're taking the fish. The fish in BC is like gold. It was the wealth of the chiefs here. The rest of the country does not realize how much that the extraction economy means, that none of the wealth of the extraction economy for which the taxpayers of Canada and British Columbia pay for the extraction infrastructure. All that wealth is in other countries, and that's what an extraction economy does. So all these guys bitching in Regina about them not having any work because they want to stay in one industry that they know that they don't want to learn anything else. There's tons of work in geothermal, tons of energy in geothermal. Oh yeah, well we can't export it, but man, what we could do with Canada with it, holy cow. And then there's other geoelectric stuff I know, but you've also got solar, and these are huge growth sectors even in Alberta. And what are these guys doing? We want to build a pipeline across somebody else's land. And we don't care if there's no treaty or not. And we like it that there's troops going against the natives and arresting women. Yeah, they don't like that woman across the street from them either. That was my point about the soul voice. He says, look at the voice of the anti-pipeline protesters. One native woman yelling at them about how illegal they are and how they don't respect native rights. And here they are complaining about them not being respected. Like the perspective of the redneck belt is worse than the Trumpies in the U.S. It's crazy. And where is it coming from? Like, where is the dog whistling coming from? Right? So the Canadian yellow vests are a fraud. Okay, je parle français. Je suis la révolution en France. Okay, I'm following the revolution in France. And I've posted on my Facebook, and I guess I'll post somewhere here, of what the real yellow vests want, what was the bozo yellow vests in Canada want. So anyways, I don't want to call you guys bozos. I want you to learn something about democracy, about caring for other people, about realizing the illegality of the occupation of 85% of British Columbia by the Canadian Crown, and the crimes that were committed against those lands and how much it cost, even in recent years, even in recent lifetimes. 1976, the Forest Act took all the land in the province set aside for eventual settlement of land claims and gave it all to the forest industry, which mounted a campaign like the oil industry have done of falsity called Share BC and all these little organizations. And it was all funded out of the U.S. It was all organized by U.S. advisors, and I think that's exactly what's going on in Alberta, because there's also agitation for Alberta separation. Okay, go. Except you can't take the Saddle Lake First Nation with you. You can't take the Tsuut'ina First Nation with you. You can't take the Kainai with you. You got to give the treaty nations their rights as nations. And then in BC, legally, internationally, they are sovereign nations. So what I'm recommending, and I'm just a old white man, but I understand international law and I understand Canadian constitutionality and I understand the native perspective on this. That word perspective I'll come back to in a moment. Anyway, so what I'm suggesting is that there'd be a confederation of independent sovereign nations in all the different tribal areas of BC, and offer the whites in the area, the whites, the Chinese, the Sikhs, all the peoples, all the settler population, we're all settlers to them. We're the people who came from away, right? So imagine if Newfoundland was occupied by, I don't know, I don't want to make comparisons to other provinces because BC is unique. I'm just speaking about being occupied by troops, right, and Mounties from other provinces on territory where the Crown has no right to be. This is the international situation. So I hope that the UBCIC, the Union of British Columbian Chiefs, listens to this crazy old white man, right, and declare sovereignty. Just declare sovereignty as an alliance of sovereign nations, a Slatly and the Nuhulk, all of you. Declare a confederation like the Swiss. It might take 300 years to get like the Swiss did with a 30 years war, and we don't want war. None of us want war. But, if there's an accommodation for native sovereignty and the Albertans want to join the U.S. and, to hell with Ottawa, don't know how they're behaving about this. So here's back to that word perspective again in Ottawa. And our little princeling, our little Pierre Jr., Mr. Justin Trudeau, at this Regina town hall meeting after this woman had spoken and condemned him, and she brought up the lack of treaties and Delgamuukw, which I mentioned. Delgamuukw was a big court case, and it decided that the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Confederacy and the oral traditions and the oral knowledge was legitimate evidence, and that it was common law. It was the same as British common law, that it had to be incorporated into the Canadian Constitution. Now, since Dan George's speech, there's been all this talk about native reconciliation and pulling things back in, but in the meantime, one crime after another continued to be committed against the native people. Do I want to make a list? Attawapiskat? I want to talk about the murders and the cases that went awry, like the poor girl in Winnipeg and the kid in Larange, like the individual cases, a terrible story of Attawapiskat and other reserves like it across the country. And the whole thing was a drinking water solution that, the Prime Minister, kissed Gord Downie or whatever, hugged him, and when Gord Downie was dying, and he made a promise that he would take care of the native people for Gord Downie, like a patronizing old grandfather paternalist politician that he is, coming from his daddy's knee and being bounced on Fidel's knee as his godfather. No, Fidel wasn't the papa. I hear all that shit from the right wing all the time. I hear fake news. It's like saying that Obama was born in Kenya or wherever. This is the same kind of bullshit goes on in Canada. Fake news, and we have conservative media controlled big time. And people are just so... when I search now on YouTube, I put Wet'suwet'en, and then I go minus CBC, minus Global, minus, the Canadian network. So they want to get the better coverage. You got to get away from the Canadian media to get any true coverage. Anyways, so there's our pretty boy handsome, but not really macho at all. Prime Minister, good guy in the ring. I've watched him ring. He comes back for more punches. Okay, well, now he's coming back against something he's talking out of his depth on. Because he's talking about treaties when there are none. The treaty he's obliging is the one with Canada that Harper signed in Vladivostok, which calls for all means necessary to get Chinese interests profitable. So there's more than 1% Chinese interest in the pipeline. And this is being done because of a treaty with China. So he's talking about treaties, and there are none with the Wet'suwet'en, neither with Canada, and the Wet'suwet'en don't have a treaty with China. Now, it looks like they're working things out with Coastal GasLink, but basically the thing is, he just basically point was you just can't build on top of other people's property. No matter how much you love your job in Alberta, working on the big rigs and feeling like a man and being a rich man, and you're all doing well, you're all making money while people are sleeping on the street around you. Redneck belt sickens me. Feel like I'm in Ohio or something like that. Or no, worse than that. It feels like Alabama. BC got compared to Dixie a lot. Did you know that? And did it ever occur to you that Social Credit, that their theme music was like white Dixieland? And they got all this futurist technocratic architecture. It's still that was a thing with the Liberals, and also the way municipal architecture here, there's certain style of international futurism. So anyways, our Prime Minister in Regina saying perspective about this woman after she was done pointing out the treaty law, that there is no law, there is no treaty. So everything he's doing there is illegal. He is being a tyrant and a dictator and putting troops into an area where the Crown has no right to be. The RCMP are only in BC because they were on contract for policing. They weren't brought in as a paramilitary unit. The only other time they've done it like this, lately anyway, is in 1993, also under the NDP, for the Gustafson Lake scenario, which is a long story, which I can't get into here. But it was also a huge paramilitary operation by the RCMP. Now we have the troops in there. Why were the troops in there? Why? To scare off the TMX protesters. Right? That here, this is what I'm going to do if you try and stop my TMX little baby, you know. Oh, whose TMX is it again? It was Kinder Morgan's, and you're bailing them out, and they're an American company. Why? For the sake of this pipeline that will make gas more expensive for Americans, as well as Canadians? To build something to supply that China is not even going to give you a free trade deal. Anyway, I got to get back on the subject of Mr. Trudeau's perspective. Because when that woman who was kind of shy and had to get it together to get all her things out looked down, and not used to being on camera and, you know, speaking up to a man of his power and charisma, and she spoke up to him, she spoke truth to power, and then she kind of left. He says, well, aren't you going to say in here what I have to say? And he says, well, and then he goes, well, thank you for your perspective, in his usual patronizing, about to say nothing terms, you know, and it was perspective. She just told you the truth, Mr. Prime Minister. She just told you the legal truth, and you're not acknowledging it. You're saying, well, thank you for your perspective. This is not a court of law. This is a court of public opinion. And either you answer to the court of public opinion, or you don't deserve the position you're in. So I'm totally against the kind of power that gives anybody the one-man power that you have, or Emmanuel Macron. And I hear the French Yellow Vests have just gotten the support of the Italian five-star government. Yes, keep on fighting for democracy. They want direct democracy in Italy too. And I think we need it here in Canada. I think we need to get rid of Parliament. I think we need to have constitutional assemblies in each province, because we each have different problems. Yeah, and like I say, if Alberta wants to, you know, get it together for statehood and they build the interstate at Fairbanks, great. Just leave the First Nations alone, you know. And the settlement has to be made is how much gold. The tar sands, you know, the health issues, you guys building pipelines, you don't give one good goddamn about the people in the tar sands First Nations who have cancer rates 5 times your own, or that they don't have fresh water, and that you've ruined the hunting, and that you've caused these huge forest fires, and you're in climate change denial when it's right in your face, and Alberta's rivers are going to dry up because the ice is going. And where are you? You know, we have huge floods in Calgary. You think that was just deforestation? Well, deforestation is part of climate change, kids. You know, industry has ruined Canada by everybody wanting to get rich off giving things away. Just rip it up, dig it up, ship it off. So all the wealth left Canada, all the wealth left Alberta. Look at Norway, the famous comparison to Norway. Same with BC, with all our trees. You know, all our trees, all our gold, all our coal. And what do we do with it? And what do we do with the downstream benefits? No, we don't care about developing. We just want to stay just what we are. Hewers of wood, drawers of water, you know, builders of dams. That's all we do. We're beavers. And my line about why the beaver is our national animal, because we're industrious little creatures who care for their families and work hard and cut down trees and build dams and build houses and take care of our kids in the long, cold winter, and we learn to play hockey and all that. Yeah, the beaver, the national symbol, right on the nickel. You know, built the fur trade, you know, that built the foundations of why the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company were even in Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en territory. That became British, but they never had treaties. And this is a big deal internationally. This is like, Britain is culpable for this, because they were treaties that were obliged to get Britain to get done. And they put it in the hands of colonial officials who got rid of the one governor who's non-white, you know, who was cutting treaties, and just swept them aside and said, oh no, the treaties aren't our problem, we'll join Canada and that's all their problem. And then all that land that was set aside was given to the forest industry, and that was in modern lifetimes. This was not like 100 years ago. This was done recently. The same with the building of the tar sands after Pierre Trudeau. We just wanted to allow scientific studies. It never meant it for export, did not want it to go for export. Too expensive, too far from markets, and not high quality oil in the long run. And as much technology as they've shown, it's still junk oil. The bitumen, it is. Unless you process it on site and turn it into what other countries turn it into. But the same with our trees. We didn't turn it into furniture like Norway does with its. You're not allowed to ship raw logs out of Norway. So Norway is rich and Alberta is poor. And lots of people in BC are poor, while what they do for income here is the money crowd, they just said, oh, well, let's make real estate the new gold, the new trees. the new export product. So now we have real estate owned abroad, expensive like hell for everybody else. There's no housing built for people. I'm moving out of Vancouver, like a lot of people are, into the interior, to get away from the incredible, steep, bizarre cost of living and surreality of the lower mainland, which is a casino for dirty money. And the casinos are also dirty money because the government was supposed to be sports and culture, and no, now they're all private casinos, So we don't have any control over change. The people don't have any control over change in Canada. So that's why direct democracy, like what people in France want, is what we need here. But how to get there? Because Canadians are complacent. Canadians are complacent about what's happening to the Wet'suwet'en right now. That people need jobs. People need jobs. People need jobs. That's a big mantra of the media machine, isn't it? And of the right-wing media machine, and of the guys in the steps of Regina. We want our jobs. And these people not respecting the rights of us to have the jobs. And we demand a pipeline so that we have jobs. Well, boys, go learn solar. Go learn geothermal. Go study up on some science. I really admire guys who can build things and work hard, because I can't. But God, there's so much things around for you guys to learn, because your kids are going to have to grow up in a world that's being created by what you're doing. By you building pipelines and tar sands and keeping building subdivisions and driving big trucks and all that. Well, you're affecting your own kids' futures. So you're not respecting your kids. You're not respecting the world that they have to grow up in. I know plenty of people in 18, 19, 20, 21, and they're terrified of the future. And they see the older people not cluing in. And it's all about your job. It's all about your job. Well, I'll tell you what, you yellow jacket Canadians, right? You yellow jacket truckers, you yellow jacket oil monkeys, the people in France, no, they care about the poor. They want like a universal basic income. They want to get rid of the banks. They want direct democracy. They want a lot more than you want. You only want your own good goddamn job. Well, a native woman, oh, look at the face of oil protesters. Yeah, they're in a minority in this country. And she's from a reserve where they're doing a potash mine. Does she have a say in that decision? Does she agree with it? Have you occurred to that? Just say, well, she's off from her reserve, so she's going to profit from it. How do you know that? How do you know? Because lots of reserves, when they make money, their band members don't make money. That's what the Isle No More movement was actually all about, was reform within Native government. And the reality of Native government is that the traditional Native government existed before the Indian Act, like the Iroquois Confederacy and many others, Ktunaxa, the Kainai, all of them, they all had like their own forms of government, Chilcotin, they all had their own forms of government, as did the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan. And unlike Central Canada and the prairies, there were no treaties signed, because the capitalists moved in from California and said, well, we're just going to ignore all this. Oh, and when the reserves, there was an O'Reilly Commission, the Vowell Commission, the McKenna-McBride Commission. These are all commissions where the commissioners traveled around BC trying to meet chiefs. They went there at times a year where the guys knew they weren't away, or they just didn't listen to them. They gave them little bits of land, but nowhere near as commensurate with the numbers that were called for by the legislation, which was something like, I can't remember, so many acres per person. Instead, you get these little micro parcels. In some areas, the older areas like Lillooet and the Canyon, there's a lot of reserves. But most of BC, like up the Gitxsan country, there's not much in the way of reserves up there. But there is vast amounts of clear cuts on the traditional chieftaincies, which is what the Delgamuukw case was about. So a book by Terry Glavin called Death Feast at Dim Lahamid, about the background of the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Confederacy and its founding sort of story. This giant disaster, this Medik that destroyed a city called Dim Lahamid. On the Skeena at the Hazelton, there was a city, and this big mountain fell on it, and big wave or something called Medik that came on as a bear, they call it. This giant inland tsunami wiped them out. And all the history, all the natives of BC have their own history. There's a whole history like medieval Europe, once you learn it. This is medieval Europe, basically the same kind of situation, a bunch of chieftaincies and stuff like that. And you have this crown, this abstract fiction called the Crown, representing a woman on a distant shore who never had treaties with these people, sending in troops, sending in the paramilitary, founded as the Royal Northwest Mounted Police, and in its charter's first line it says to subdue the West and tame the Indians. I can't remember the wording. And yeah, what happened? Well, there was an organized famine. There was Poundmakers' War. The RCMP weren't here except in Fort Steele for what went down there. It was Tin Baskets War, I can't remember what it was, Tobacco Plains War. But yeah, there were RCMP to Fort Steele, and also at the pass, at the White Pass and the Chilkoot Pass, where at the border of Alaska and British Columbia on the way to the Yukon and the gold rush, because we didn't have an imperial government that had the foresight to occupy Skagway, the Yukon ports, long before the gold rush happened. Because why? Because the Royal Navy in Britain was looking at other parts of the world, and they could have even preempted the Americans having Alaska, but Britain had no vision here. But the reality is, at the end of the analysis, there's a woman on the other shore that has this thing called the Crown, which has the troops and the paramilitary, and has been flogging British Columbia real estate and the unsurrendered territories as some kind of weird abstract export resource, because that's what it is. Real estate export is what we've done. We've taken the real estate, which Rudyard Kipling tells us was a word term invented in Vancouver. It's a little passage by him, this curious term called real estate. It talks about the speculation market. Well, that's been internationalized and it's been casinoized. And there's been a money laundromat for a long time. The dirty money apparently is kind of leaving town, but it'll still be here. They'll just tone down their operations. Same with the pot operations. Same as the stupid Marijuana Act. So Mr. Prime Minister has this perspective that somehow there are Crown. It doesn't matter that there are no treaties in British Columbia, so she still has the right, because it's on the map as Canada, to send in the Canadian troops from Alberta or Ottawa or wherever they're from, or whatever kind of troops they were, in whatever number. I still don't know the number of troops. I still don't know the cost of this operation. I still don't know what it's costing us all. I'd like also to know a balance sheet of how many hundreds of millions and billions in trees and ores and stuff have come out of the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Confederacy. And what is if this had been civil cases in the States for child abuse, right? A settlement for residential school survivors, how many million each would they get? And how many of them are there? Okay, Canada, what do we owe the Native people? We owe them everything we have, including those jobs. Those guys in Alberta and Saskatchewan are rallying and driving across the country. They have this little rally, and then this woman comes up and says, you're not respecting the fact that you can't just build over somebody else's land. They don't care. They want their jobs. They don't care that British Columbia is in the way, and the only thing that they can see is that China is the market. No, the U.S. is the market. And fine, and you're building a refinery, fine, but you know what, boys? You can learn other things than just oil and gas, and your kids are going to have to, learn to breathe the air and drink the water that they can't drink, the same as the natives can't drink theirs. And you don't care about the natives not having, they just want more welfare. I see that in the comments. That's a racist comment, and these are the people that were put on welfare by having their culture and their persons raped, by having their lands and their resources taken, and other people come and get rich while interning them and making it illegal. In 1922, it became illegal for more than 2 Native men at once. That was a political meeting. 3 Native men was a political. So that's why they tried to ban the potlatch. Didn't quite work on areas where you couldn't get to, like the Central Coast. The potlatch is a huge gift feast, which was the foundation of the Northwest economy in this ancient medieval region. I'm calling it medieval because it's 1,000 years old at least. The systems there's some different changes in territory and stuff, but the different not rival cultures necessarily, rival chieftaincies with many different languages. They weren't unified linguistic nations at all. Sometimes they were, but the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Confederacy were a unified nation since the Middle Ages or before. Canada was only a colony of Britain since 1763, or the Canada was anyway, and this was not in British Columbia. This was only a fur trading district. Canada had no title here, nor did British Columbia. Before that, the Hudson Bay Company did not have title here like they did on the prairies, which is the basis of most of the prairie treaties. Right, Treaty 8 in the northeast of BC, or Treaty 6 maybe, is the Athabasca Mackenzie drainage. Right, so it's not in Rupert's Land. So that land, all the Rupert's Land in Yukon and Mackenzie Valley and northern British Columbia, that all became, except northern British Columbia is different because it's Stikine territory in 1862. But all of that land east of the Rockies and the Yukon, they didn't have, there's no title from the Hudson's Bay Company that Canada bought. It doesn't matter. Canada moved RCMP, into there anyway. They were even going to build a pipeline down the Mackenzie Valley till the Danes stopped them. The Decho, all those guys, they stopped them, the Mackenzie Valley pipeline hearings. So the whole point about getting oil in landlocked Alberta, I even heard one of the fools claim that the law of the sea required that Alberta be given a corridor to the sea. Yeah, for what though? For what? You see? And this pipeline, the LNG pipeline, because it has 1% Chinese interest, it's not covered by Canadian environmental and labor standards. It's exempt. People don't get this. Like the thorny web of the complexities of Canadian colonialism that were done by the Vladivostok Treaty. You know, what it means, right? I just say that it's irrelevant because I suspect that Harper was blackmailed. You know, and don't remember that it was Mr. Putin who arranged this little meeting between Mr. Jiang and Mr. Harper. Oh, yeah. Mr. Putin did have his hands in Canada. No wonder Mr. Harper was going like, oh, that Putin guy. You know, maybe there was more going on to that. Well, that I'm really afraid of the Russians thing. Maybe there was more to that with what we know. But I see our Prime Minister patronizing, talking in circles, being a fop from Montreal, talking in a fictional reality. He is our Trump. Trudeau is our Trump. Canadians got to wake up. And you guys on the prairies, you got to wake up about the change in the future that's coming. You want a good world for your future, for your kids' future. You all got lots of kids. You got nice houses, big trucks. You got a nice lifestyle. You know what? Move into the new economy, right? Learn about, I have a friend who can set you up with deep thermal drilling, you know? He's in Nova Scotia right now. But there is more power under you in thermal energy than there is in fossil fuels. And it's the same jobs, bros. It's all drilling and energy grids and shit like that. And also your local power. You can drill for your own house and power your own house, man. Your subdivisions, and you've laid out for cars. No, that's got to end. You got to stop building into the woodland. You got to start respecting what's left of the natural earth. Your kids want you to. And what do you want? You want your job. You don't care if it not just desecrates land, but desecrates laws, desecrates international law, which Canada itself is a violation of international law. You know, even its occupation of Resolute and Alert are questionable. And it only happened in this century to assert Canadian sovereignty, you know, and the Americans showed that they didn't really care. They sailed the MSS Manhattan through there anyway. And what do? Oh no, we passed something to say it was okay retroactively. We're so submissive. We're so submissive. We tug our forelock to imperial powers all the time, and we were trained that way by Britain. Obey. Obey, do as you're told. We are the crown. Do as you're told. I have the authority because I have the crown. I heard Macron say that he had the authority, that he was president, so he was the voice of democracy. Well, Mr. Trudeau, you're not the voice of democracy. You only have a 39.6% share of the vote, right? You do not represent all Canadians, and you definitely do not speak for the law. You definitely do not speak for constitutional reality. I have to go. I think I have a friend waiting. I never did get my shaving done. I was going to trim everything up, you know. So I'm the professor. I'm Mike Clevin. I'm go by Skookum One and Big Skookum, but the professor. I'm Mike Clevin, CLEVN. Anyway, put me on your files if you want. I already know I've been watched for the intelligence agencies for years because I helped found the Green Party in the days after the Squamish Five, and they were watching all environmentalists. They've been watching them all since. So Mr. Harper / Trudeau, Mr. Trudeau / Harper. Harper with nicer hair is talking about perspective, and he's being his usual patronizing self. At least Harper could be coldly slimy instead of sleazily slimy like a cheap car salesman, except I don't think you can sell cars, Justin. You're not selling the truth. You're not selling the facts. And you're not selling a future for Canadians. You're digging your heels into the oil and gas economy, which needs to be ended worldwide. The banks need to be reformed. Debts need to be wiped. Corporations need to be broken up. Resources need to be nationalized like they were in Norway. And we're going to have to deal with the Americans on that one because they own part of the tar sands too. And a lot of our infrastructure. And how do we take back and renationalize the parts of the British Columbia government that the Campbell government sold to the United States? How do we get them back? Do we renationalize what are now American assets in Canada, even though they're Canadian government operations? So I'm making all these points, you see, of all this stuff. Canadians don't listen to me. But this is for the international community about how absurd Canada is. You think the States is crazy constitutionally. No, the States has a much better constitution. If only they were better, they didn't have that stupid Second Amendment. and the electoral college and bullshit like that, But if America had run their democracy better, its structure is a lot better. But I don't like the role of having a king that has that much power, the presidency. No, it needs to be like, a confederate republic like Switzerland, the Helvetian Republic, which is all self-governing cantons. Each village governs itself and all the way up. Just as it is and within the tribal chieftaincies in BC. Let's call it that. We don't use the word tribal much, but it's more of an American term. But the hereditary chieftaincies are the traditional governments. The bands, the organized First Nations, are Indian-Act governments. They are not actually the original governments. Like the Haudenosaunee, which is the Mohawk Confederacy, and Guniangaga is the country, and Dana and Day, which is the country of the Dana, the land of the Dana, and the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en Confederacy, the Ktunaxa have a certain name, the Silk, the Okanagan Nation, the Nicola Alliance. These are all countries that have no treaties with the Crown. So my closing comment says it's time to put out a map that shows all these countries that should not have the Union Jack and the Crown flying over them. And Mr. Horgan shouldn't be standing. I notice he's getting fat. John, you're eating well as premier, huh? What was he saying? He wants it all resolved peacefully and stuff like this. But he was saying things that were just like, you're supposed to talk about reconciliation in the same breath as supporting a police action on land where you don't even have a right to be. For a project that your whole government is staked on. The LNG project at Kitimat and the pipeline to it. And all that other stuff up in the Northwest. But the reality is, how many people in the Northwest did not vote in the referendum, which means they abstained because they can't take part in a Crown government, anything for the Crown, after what the Crown has done to them and their lands, what's done to them personally and to their lands and to the economy. And all the whites in that area will leave when the economy up there ends. You see, this Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en, and they're left with it afterwards. So this is the extraction economy. This is the reality of Canada as a colony. British Columbia is a colony without the colonialists even having a legal right to be here. It has been an occupation. It has been an occupation. The unsurrendered territories are actually the occupied territories. The First Nations of British Columbia are Palestinians. I really mean that seriously. And so far they haven't gotten like they might have after Oka, or because of Oka, or after the Mohawk Civil War before that. There's different, pro-pipeline native groups and anti-pipeline native groups. But this is all dog whistle politics, because destabilization in Canada means American intervention. And that's why I say that there's American agitators involved in the Alberta Yellow Vest movement and the co-opting of it by Rebel Media. Rebel Media now is complaining about what they're saying about Rebel Media's headline. I'm not going to look at their garbage. Just don't look at Rebel Media. Unhit them. Like, don't hit them. Unhit them. Don't hit them and say not interested if it shows up as a requested video. Do that. We got to shut that channel down the same way InfoWars got shut down for spreading lies and hatred. So this one is it's claiming that the sovereignty issue has been debunked. Oh no, it hasn't. This is Rebel Media. This is the anti-Semitic crazy bastards who are, I won't get into it, but this is the radical right in Canada. They have more media than the radical progressives do. Am I radical progressive? No, I guess radical Democrat, radical green, well, radical something, radical Democrat, I guess, that I want to see a fair and intelligent government. I want all the people to be able to have an equal voice, not to give power to elected officials who become bagmen, who become intermediaries or apologists, or like Mr. Trudeau talking in circles. He's paid to talk in circles. And he's paid like, well, thank you for your perspective, but here, let me spin it for you for a while. And that's why Mike Marison and Pat Kinsella and Mike McDonald, that's why they engaged him, because he had that manner. And why does he have that manner? Well, he's not just because he was a drama teacher and knows how to handle kids and has a rapport with kids, but also because he has a rapport with the 20, 30 nothings because he was a bouncer, whistler. So he's a party boy. He's a party boy. He hangs out with the jock money crowd. That's who he knows. And the Liberals here in BC have a long history, and Liberal in Canada, and there is connections to the federal party just by the three names I just mentioned. Are the same guys put him in power, are the same ones that put Campbell in power. And Mark Marison, he used to be married to Christy Clark. So I believe things like, I could get into the other things I believe about British Columbia politics. It's complicated. There's a very complicated history here. I'll be doing it by video. It's easier to do it this way than to try and write it, and I think people will more likely to listen. Because when I write, it's long-winded and even more ornate talk. It's easy for me to talk in the vernacular like this, rather than try and write in prose. Because I'm not actually a prose writer, I'm a poet. Terrible thing to admit in this country because it's shameful to be a poet here. Well, whoa, how do you do for your income? Well, I don't know. Should I work on the pipeline? Maybe I should work on the pipeline. Maybe I should dig ditches. Or maybe you just want me to stand in the food line and go live in the rain like all the other people who have to because you got sucked in by the banks to pay for houses. Like, why are the real estate market in places like Lillooet and 100 Mile, why are they the same price ranges as suburban Vancouver? Somebody tell me that. Why? In Nova Scotia, you can buy a really nice house for $200,000. Here, what? 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million? Apartments in that same price range. Although I just talked to somebody who bought some for $200,000 condo. But you have to get equity in order to survive because the banks have done that. The banks have made it necessary to have equity. At the same time as also making it necessary to have a whole bunch of the population that have to be supported by taxes. And everybody bitches about the poor. They just want more taxes. Like, did John Horgan's government help out the poor last year? $100. Come on, buddy. While your buddies are making how much money on Site C and then on this pipeline project in Kitimat? Like the gap, the abyss in morals here is frightening. The abyss in morals in Canada. I got to remember that my friend is probably waiting for me. Big Mike, Skookum 1, the Young Professor signing off.